idea that the Earth didn't used to have a tilt and that there was eternal spring because there was no tilt. And I don't know why.
Who fucked that up?
I don't know. I'm guessing there was I think it's maybe the idea there was like an advanced civilization. They like jacked the Earth up, which I've also heard. Oh, that it could have been because of a pole switch. That maybe there was like a pole switch and this did it. But then that the Earth also was the year was 360 days, so it was like a perfect orbit.
Oh, then we had that extra 5 days, just messed everything
Exactly.
out, yeah.
And then this is the whole Hyperborea thing that because there was no tilt, you had it like basically the same sunshine everywhere, so that people did live up north, but it was a lovely climate. And then the Earth tilted, and I've actually heard an interesting idea that that's actually where the flood comes, because when the Earth tilted, it caused the oceans to slosh, so that it's not a bunch of rain. I actually have read some like actual dude wrote a scientific paper on this.
We're not experiencing rain. We're experiencing slosh.
Well, no, and that actually
heavy
sloshing.
In the biblical narrative, it actually talks about the deeps being unleashed, which people have been like, "What does that mean?" But I think it could be compelling that if the poles shifted, the tilt changed, and then the oceans literally like poured onto the land.
That is a terrifying thought.
It's a terrifying idea that the water was just sloshing.
But then now is it just kind of sloshing in circles?
But it would come on
and then went back into a different spot.
Go to other places. So then it's actually an interesting idea that's why you could get universal flood narratives, but also not quite universal, but also like different timelines on them, because it wouldn't have happened everywhere at the same time.
Wow.
It actually is a pretty interesting idea. But again, back in the day, we had a perfect 360 year with just nice, immaculate, eternal spring. And that's like the golden age, because like almost every culture does have like life used to be good and then it like stopped being good. That's kind of like this universal theme. And it's an interesting idea to think that maybe there was a
Garden of Eden, if you will.
Maybe there was a world pre-tilt. Maybe the moon isn't supposed to be there. We're on like our 5th moon. They're all bad. Wow. I don't know. I've got to research more on them.
I mean, all of that.
Yes, we definitely need to research more. We need to hear more on this.
But all of that makes sense if it doesn't really check out because the Earth is flat though. Like it would make sense.
That's a really good point. It actually is still.
If the Earth can't be tilted and flat. It's one or the other.
That would just be like all rush to one side.
Yeah, you're right. Sam just found the holes in this theory.
Okay, well I'll go back to the drawing board on this one.
Yeah,
hello, and Mike Van, and welcome to another episode of the Undertowers podcast. I'm Steven.
I'm Daniel.
I am Sam.
Speak, friend, and enter. Those of you who are of the more perceptive persuasion may have noticed that we have a 4th chair with us this evening. That is because for the very first time we have a guest. A very special guest, a very dear friend, a one and only Mr. Scott Sava will be joining us, and we are so excited for this interview. We had a phenomenal time with him. But before we get to that, we're not doing any news because we want to get into the interview as quickly as possible. But a word from our sponsors.
Yes. This just came in really late. I haven't even had time to run it by the guys yet. So
we're all about the money, though. So just whatever sponsor comes our way, we're taking.
Just accept them.
As long as it's not pro, go on.
I did read this to my wife before, and it caused her to put her head in her hands and her face on the table.
Because of how acting it is.
Well, just because I don't
know.
Go
for it. Read.
We'll just go. So, we are sick and tired of all the mamby-pamby bullcrap. Your cup of coffee in the morning should feel like a pact made with the forces of darkness and not some mocha frappe woke nonsense. Coffee is supposed to wake you up, not make you woke. Talking macroaggressions, not microaggressions. Let's put some Mornblade in your morning Joe. Black Sword Coffee Company is real coffee made by real warriors, consumed by real evil sentient swords. Oh, damn. All our coffee is fair trade and roasted in-house over the souls of our blades, consumed in the depths of deep malevolence. Tired of brew created by darkness... Excuse me.
This is serious. This is serious.
Yeah, dude, yep, back up. We'll edit that out. Tired of coffee made by whiny little twinks? It's time for brew created by darkness-possessed freaks. A coffee so black, you'll be asking for your money back. Guaranteed. Put that thing in your belly like Glaurung did. Black Black Sword Coffee Company is the coffee subscription for you from the bowels of despair straight to your door. So,
thank you, Black Sword. Again,
Black Sword.
As always, code UnderTowers for 10% off.
Yes.
So you'll be asking for your money back, like for sure, but you're not going to get it. Like you'll definitely be asking.
You won't give it, but you will
Of course
want
you're
it.
not gonna.
Want your money back.
But yeah, so
That's a guarantee.
it has come to my attention that Black Sword and Damsel Distressing are currently at war. So we are no longer affiliated in any capacity with Damsel Distressing.
We're all in on Black Sword Coffee.
All in on Black Sword for the time being, just
Absolutely.
so everyone's aware.
Okay. All right. And let's get to our interview with Scott. Okay. All right. Welcome back to Undertowers. We have with us tonight our very first guest and a very old dear friend of mine, Mr. Scott Sava. Thank you, Scott, for coming on. We talked about this a little bit. I was just on your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
We did a miniature painting.
That was fun.
It was a lot of fun. I actually had a blast. That was the first, I guess, kind of art teaching thing that I've ever done. And so I honestly didn't know what to expect, and I definitely didn't know how I was going to do painting and talking at the same time.
Yeah, you did great.
Because
you did so good. He was standing for 90 minutes. He
that
was
also
painting a
something I didn't know how I was
miniature,
going to handle.
and he was answering questions. You treated it like a pro.
I mean, I guess it helps that I do have a now 6-year-old and an almost 3-year-old, and so anytime that I have painting at home, I guess I am answering questions frequently. Not as technical as some of the questions that I was getting. But one thing that you kind of took the helm on, Scott, talking about on your channel, that I thought would be a fun way to get this going was our history, because we have a couple other guests lined up that are brand new to us that we don't know. But you and I go back, what did we say, 15 years?
At least,
2009?
Yeah.
Dang.
So
that's as long as us.
Well, almost as long, but we're 25 years.
Yeah.
And
Are
he's
we?
yeah.
Oh my God.
And,
I know you were cutting off a decade.
and so close.
It's okay.
I mean, in the grand scheme of the universe,
I still feel like
close.
2020 was yesterday, so it's
I know.
like
Yeah.
that's a
But
while ago.
so yeah, I remember distinctly we met. It wasn't at Panera. It was one of those like kind of bread bowl soup places that was more popular in the aughts.
Yeah.
But you had reconnected with my dad because you guys knew each other before I was a thing.
Shout out
back
Ron.
in California.
He's our faithful supporter.
Absolutely. Shout out my dad. But yeah, you guys had reconnected. I think you had just moved here.
We moved
shortly.
17 years ago. So
Yeah.
so it was,
And but yeah, we met, and I showed you. You very patiently watched one of my student films.
Oh, yeah, that's
the
right.
The supervillain one that I made,
Yeah.
which you were in, Daniel. I think
Yes.
you played one of
not
the
the
shit
super
guards.
villain though, right?
No, he was the. I had these like. I was actually way ahead of my time when I was writing this, but it was a very subversive piece with the superheroes were actually the bad guys.
I was thinking of the Born Again Identity.
Oh no, that was. Did you hear about that, Sam?
I did not.
Or Scott? I had
did
that was okay. Sidebar, because this is funny.
Honestly, yeah, that one. I mean, Kirk Cameron should be cast in that for sure.
The very first movie that I ever made was for a youth group talent show at church, and I made the Born Again Identity, and it was pretty much scene for scene a little 13-minute remake of the Born Identity.
Yes.
And
They had some good shots in that movie though. So
we
it was
did
pretty-
actually.
yeah.
It was a lot of fun. Daniel played Satan.
Yes, I was Satan. He was the shady MK Ultra CIA guy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Really in touch with that.
And then
type
it
of
was that.
character.
What was his name? Jason? Did we just name him Jason Bourne or what?
Jason
did we,
Born Again.
Jason Bourne Again.
Yeah.
But then it was that he had forgotten he had gotten saved.
Yeah.
He lost his memory.
Oh god.
And there was the one scene that ended up in the cutting room floor was him, and it was Nathan was playing Jason, and then Brianna was playing the Maria or whatever the character's name was, but they were sitting in an Arby's, and it was the scene from the movie when Jason Bourne's like, I can't explain it. How do I know the license plate of every single car out in the... and it was that scene, but it was like, how is it that I know every single verse and blah, 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 blah.
I know all these Bible verses now. Where do these come from?
Definitely
but anyways, that wasn't the movie that
theological liberties with that one.
That wasn't the movie that I showed Scott.
Okay.
No, it was the supervillain one that I made.
Scott, do you want to see it now a little bit?
I think that needs to go up on YouTube.
I think
the born again identity.
the
born again Christian.
I know. Well, the fact that I made it is very funny.
Yeah.
But back in the day. But anyways, it was so you watched the student film very graciously, and then we were in touch throughout the rest of my time at film school, and then ever since we've been working on all sorts of things and writing together and just hanging out and
You built the Hobbit hole.
We did, yeah. Well, I was kind of apprentice building the Hobbit hole, but me and Dad built the Hobbit hole.
Yeah.
And so that was doubly cool. This weekend was getting to be back in the Hobbit hole.
What is the Hobbit hole?
The Hobbit hole. That's Scott's domain. Is the Hobbit hole. We redesigned. You want to tell that?
So you'll find this out probably a little bit on this interview. Is I'm a bit shy. I mean, I'm very introverted, and so I guess Ron would always have to convince me to leave the house. And so we just would joke that I'm a hobbit. I just like to be just at home working on my artwork, painting. And one day, because my studio was in the basement, one day we found black mold, and Ron was like, we got to clean this out. This isn't healthy for you. And he said, I'll help you. I'll do this. And one day he just came in with a huge blueprint of a hobbit hole, like, and he goes, I'm going to turn your basement into a hobbit hole. he had this vision.
Yeah.
And I was like, are you sure? And he's like, yeah, pay for the materials and we'll do that. And he did. I mean, both of them, they just built this, we've got these arches and this circular spot for my you'll have to go and see it, but it's incredible. It's so cool. And it's this magical place that I get to go downstairs and just sit in a hobbit hole every day and make art. And when COVID hit and everything, and we were all I had this little magical place that I could just go, and the kids would come down, we'd play World of Warcraft together, and it was just really, and so that's. And then I went online, and now I have 3 million followers who see me in the Hobbit hole, and it's become a part of like my identity.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, what a cool accidental, kind of set piece that ended up being built for your internet side. And I wanted to say, having been watching your videos for the last few years, how I'm extremely proud of you. I don't know if I've said this yet specifically. But I remember coming to your house before we did the basement and anything, and helping you film a
that's right,
Kickstarter video for one of the Dreamland.
And I couldn't get. I wrote the lines and I could not get the lines or anything.
And then watching you doing, all these videos and stuff that you're doing online now is it's amazing to see. So I'm very proud of you.
Thank you. It's been a lot of work, and I do think about that time a lot. I think about, I still can't remember lines, even the ones I write, but I've learned how to speak up, how to smile when I talk, and just the presence that it takes, but all of that has been just such a slog, teaching, because naturally I don't speak like how I'm seen on the videos, and I don't, I'm usually wearing a t-shirt and whatnot, and but no, this has been such an amazing learning experience, just kind of becoming this person that I think needed to be there. Mm-hmm. I've become, I don't want to be an art teacher, but I think I've become someone who encourages people to make art.
Mentor kind of.
Yeah.
How has that affected your art, do you think?
Oh, a lot. I mean, over the last 4 years, my art has grown so much because I'm not forced to, but because I've been making art every day, and pushing myself. And I did like 60 days of studying the masters where I copied everything from Van Gogh to Monet to Norman Rockwell to, and just for 60 straight days I did a new little painting, and we learned about the different artists and so things like that. I've grown as a human being, being around, making friends with people of different races, different genders, different I've learned about gender fluidity and transgender and all this stuff that I'm 55, is not something that we grew up with. And all of this has made me a better human being, and getting to know different people and adding that to my art. My art now has representations of people wearing hijabs. I've got drag, people in drag. I've got Indian people. I've got, just Aboriginal, indigenous people. Because you look at whether it's Michelangelo or Da Vinci or Monet or Van Gogh, but you look at artists throughout history, and they usually paint the same few people. You're in France.
Interesting.
You're going to be painting French people.
Right.
Your
circle is much smaller.
Exactly. But now in this age, I have access to people from all over the world. I have access to photos from people from all over the world, and my art has become a representation of all of the people from around the world, and that's something that I think has made me, again, not only a better person, but a better artist. And it makes me feel happy, just like when I did the Guild.
Yeah.
If 15-year-old me would have done the Guild, it would have been a barbarian, a magician, and it would have been just the classic, just the same old white men, and probably not even a girl, and that's just, and a dragon. But this journey has, I've benefited, I think, more than the 3 million followers. I think I've gotten so much more out of it than I could ever give.
That's so cool.
That's very cool.
Authentic. Scott, what do you think about AI art? How do you feel about that?
Well, it's AI generated images. It's not art, but
there you go. Right there. I think.
Yeah, it's I've used it and dabbled with it to understand it. I've even made NFTs too, just to understand it, because I think it's good to find out what the hubbub is. And I think had AI generated images been pitched to artists as, hey, say I want to do something a little bit of Degas with a splash of Gustav Klimt and blah, 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 blah. And you throw that in there and you get something back, and that inspires your next painting.
Yeah.
I think as kind of like a conceptual thing, I think it would have been so much better and people would have accepted it. But instead they gave it over to just anybody who's now claiming that it's art, and then corporations are using it, and it's based off of stolen. If you're going to steal our art,
right.
Let us use it. Yeah. And let us only use it. Don't give it to other people. You're using our art to use it.
And it's trained on that.
Yeah. Exactly. Almost like it could be a cool tool if they.
As a tool, had they given it to artists, I think it would have been embraced pretty well as a kind of like a whiteboard. Because I've used it several times where I'm just like, I think I want to do Athena, the goddess Athena. But just like with this war scream, and I came up with some images and I did a little painting of it. That was really kind of fun. And I don't have to worry about copyright or anything like that.
Yeah.
You know, it's just I'm using it as a springboard for my own art.
Sure.
I think
That is
that
so
would have worked really well, but they didn't do it. They went the corporate route, which was stupid.
That's kind of been my thought. Is like I like it from a conceptual level, because like we talked about on the start of the live the other day, miniature painting for whatever reason is kind of the only fine art that I've ever found any level of skill with. I've never been that good at drawing, so I have ideas in my head.
I mean, me and you tried nude portraits a while ago. You know, do you remember that?
Draw me like one of your French girls, Sam.
We're really inspired.
But so like I like the idea, if a movie were to ever happen or something like that in the future, if I had some kind of fantastical creature in my head, or even something like a book cover, if I'm wanting to try to communicate something better than just with words to somebody that is going to actually paint a cover, I like the idea of having a tool to say, here, look at this thing. Yeah. This is kind of what I'm thinking. I can't draw this. Yeah. But so here's something for you to go off of that maybe is going to communicate what I'm thinking better than just. Yeah. Or even, like I've thought about D&D campaigns or something, and being able to whip up an image of a location or an NPC or something. But when it starts getting into any sort of commercial applications, or I remember this was maybe a year ago or so when there were like art contests that were starting to be won by AI generated art. Yeah. And that always seemed just extremely skeezy to me.
I think that's so many young kids are learning on a tablet, and that's totally acceptable. Digital art is wonderful, but I think that's the one benefit we currently have is traditional art right now hasn't been mistaken for AI art yet. You can have an original painting. You can feel the texture of it. You can, and it doesn't mean that at some point they're not going to, for whatever reason, come up with something that's going to be able to print out something that looks like it's been painted. But until then, at least traditional art has that advantage that digital art doesn't, because digital art's just getting stolen so bad.
Well, and it's weird how even with as advanced as it's become, even though it started slowing down because apparently it's starting to, I guess the AI is starting to learn from AI art. And so it's like, I haven't been following it that closely, but from people that I've heard talk about it that do follow it very closely, it sounds like there's actually been a pretty sharp decline in the quality because it's starting to learn off of itself. But you can always tell. Like there's always it's like an art uncanny valley where like something about that looks too real or too good in a way that means that like a person did not make this. Yeah. And then you look at the hands and it's there you go.
They get the hands up wrong a lot. But yeah. I saw an interesting thread someone talking recently about they I can't remember the parameters, but they had done something to the model where they'd turned certain weights down on it and certain weights up. I think it was one where they turned the learning down. It is interesting with AI art, the way like the like prompt generation, the way like you can turn very abstract prompts into things. Yeah. And they had generated some images, and the prompt was just like, there is something wrong with the sun. And then the images that ended up coming with it were just like very, very strange and bizarre, but evocative. But it is like you said, Stephen, there's a lot of stuff where it's like, it's just wrong feeling, and I can't put my finger on a lot of it, but it feels.
I mean, that's why I kind of say uncanny
soulless
valley.
Almost.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Soulless for sure, but it's like it's that same feeling when you I think it's that same thing that's inbred in us when from back in our caveman days of looking at something and saying that doesn't look right. That's a Neanderthal coming to eat my kids or something. Yeah. I think it's that same thing where it's like that's not made by a person.
Yeah.
Daniel had a good. Let's take it back to the beginning a little bit. How you got here.
But no, we were talking about this conversation earlier. And it was like, what was your first memory of sci-fi or fantasy?
Because that's our focus on the show is specifically science fiction fantasy. And what was your kind of introduction that you remember into that realm?
There's several. I'm going to take Spider-Man out because that's comic books.
You can talk comic books.
I know, but sci-fi fantasy specifically was when I was younger. You had the $6 Million Man.
Mm-hmm.
You had Star Trek, Battlestar Galactica. One of my favorites was Star Blazers, which was Spaceship Yamato. And,
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh gosh,
is that the one that you have the model?
Which is
a sick model of the ship.
So in the show, this is the coolest. This was one of my favorite shows. So it was Japanese imported to America, and this was the 70s. And so that and Speed Racer were my introduction to Japanese animation.
So those were some of the very first animes that came over here.
Speed Racer?
Yeah. Speed Racer,
nice.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the Mach 5, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, okay.
Sorry, there's a moth on me.
Hey, fella.
He's been flying around.
Not anymore.
So the premise of this is the Earth is dying, and there's a planet, and this being from a planet, I think it was called Iskandar, and they said that if you can get here, we can give you something that'll save your planet. And the planet's dying in 365 days. And so they take the Yamato was apparently an actual battleship from World War II that sank. That they resurrected it and they turned it into a spaceship.
I think they referenced that one in Godzilla -1. I want to say. I could be mistaken, but
possible,
continue.
Yeah. And so this ship has 365 days to get to Iskandar and back. And there's this whole race of beings that is trying to stop them. And the thing is at the end of every episode, it would be like, will they make it? Only 230 days left, and it would count down.
So it's kind of like 24 bump.
Yeah,
bump,
nice.
Bump.
It was serialized.
That's so
and
cool.
So it was so cool, and I was just riveted by that show, and I loved that they had these really cool looking spaceships. So I used to draw their little spaceships and everything.
Awesome.
But that was
Totally
me
cool.
preteen. Was mainly that. It was. $6 Million Man. I still have the lunchbox. I wasn't as into Battlestar Galactica. Buck Rogers I kind of liked a lot. And then there was Star Trek, which my cousins were into it more than I was. I didn't really get into Star Trek until The Next Generation.
Sure.
When I was in my late teens. But yeah, and then fantasy was the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings.
Oh, awesome.
That was, and Fire and Ice. But I think Fire and Ice came around more in my teens. But the Ralph Bakshi, and I have an actual cell that I never showed it to you. I should. I have a cell of one of the ring wraiths.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I bought it from an auction, and it's sitting in a drawer somewhere because I just haven't had a chance.
The ring wraiths are the human imposed.
Yeah. They're the ones. They're the ones that were. I think this is a scene from they were on the horses. This is when they were looking when Frodo and the gang were and they hide underneath the thing. That's them. So they're kind of just the cloaks and whatnot. But
that's awesome.
It was really cool. But and then because I was comic books, and then when I got into Spider-Man, and then when I got into high school, I discovered The Hobbit, and that was the first novel I actually sat and read from cover to cover, completely riveted. And then from there, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Conan came out, and that got me into the comics. Okay. And then I just switched gears from Spider-Man to Conan.
So we kind of started our book club. It wasn't the very first thing that we read, but it was one of the very first things we read when we kind of started our format of creating these kind of collegiate level reading courses for ourselves. When we were doing Sword and Sorcery, of course, the first thing that we read after a brief 2-book prelude with Tarzan as kind of a pulp fiction thing was we dove right into Conan, and we read everything that Robert E. Howard wrote from Conan.
That's
so we're massive fans. What drew you? So it was the movie first.
It was a movie first. Yeah, he was like a superhero, and the comics are very much John Buscema's art. Just enthralled me. I love, because I was reading Spider-Man. I was reading the more of the Steve Ditko, John Romita type thing, and Spider-Man was always kind of a skinny kind of guy, whereas Conan was like the Hulk. The way that John Romita drew, the way that John Buscema drew him, he was like the Hulk, and it was just this magical thing. I love. Since I was a little kid, I loved fantasy characters. Mm-hmm. I loved like centaurs and dragons and whatnot. And Conan never scratched that itch for me for that. It really didn't have the traditional fantasy stuff. Right. It was a lot more almost political than it was anything else, like it would have like this race of people is doing this and he's got to fight these people or he's trying to steal this or whatever. But it was never, there's a dungeon and there's a bunch of monsters in it. It did have monsters from time to time, but it was always a build up to that thing. And
Sam's favorite is the gray ape. Sam loves gray
felt
apes.
like he honestly, I would love to see you draw a gray ape actually. Like I don't but it was a recurring like just villainous creature. I was like, did he just hate like gorilla type monkeys? I feel like him and Tarzan dude. What's
Edgar Rice Burroughs.
Yeah, I feel like they both were like, yeah, man, there's these monkeys out there that are just really evil.
The apes from Mars had 4 arms.
Right.
They were really brutal.
And I'm looking for. We're going to read John Carter at some point because that we've just finished. Sword and Sorcery was our first big project for the book club, and at some point we'll do what do they call it? There's another term for it that John Carter falls into. It's something like
planetary romance.
Well, yeah, but there's a Sword and Sorcery name. It's like Swords and Planets or something, or
maybe Sword and Planet. Yeah, I think Sword and Planet.
Something like that. But it's essentially the Sword and Sorcery format, but in a science fiction.
Yeah.
In the science fiction genre.
Yeah.
Instead of fantasy. And
I tried reading it because I read The Hobbit to the boys, and that was really good. They love that. I tried reading the John Carter of Mars to them, and the problem with Edgar Rice Burroughs is he likes to spend 3 pages describing the texture of the moss on Mars. And it was just like, can you skip ahead, Dad? So it was like, and I found that when I would read it, I would skip ahead till I saw quotation marks. Okay, someone's talking again,
right.
And I would just do that.
That's a good method, actually.
But in reading it to the boys, I realize how absolutely misogynistic it really is.
For sure.
Yeah, because it's 100 years old, and so I when the movie came out, I had high hopes, and then I didn't like it, because there was for a silly reason, because I rewatched it years later and it was not bad. The one thing I loved about John Carter in the book was he was chivalrous. Mm-hmm. He was the epitome of chivalry. He would never stab a guy in the back. He would always give them a fighting chance. He would always try to de-escalate if he could.
He's very noble.
He was very noble, and he, from the moment he met Dejah Thoris, he was enthralled with her. He was just head over heels, and he would do anything for her. He would destroy the entire planet to save her. Mm-hmm. And in the movie, they had John Carter kind of being just like a charlatan, a bit, and I understand the story wise is like, well, we have to have him go through his arc, but I just didn't want that out of John Carter.
Well, and that's a jump. I haven't read the books yet.
Yeah. I've read the first one. It's really good.
Yeah, I look forward to reading it. I just haven't ever gotten around to it yet. But that we've had this discussion many times about Witcher is a big one that we've talked about. Where you have the character that is written very well one way in the book and is very enjoyable to read and someone that you like a lot. And then either that character or relationships. I think I even talked about this on your stream. I think somebody asked about this. They just didn't get it.
Yeah.
You know, when it came to writing the show, they just did not get it.
And from what I'm told, the writer director loved John Carter, but he came from Pixar, and I just think in the traditional way of Pixar and Hollywood is your character has to have that hole in the soul. Is the thing. They've got to have that thing, and it's very formulaic to me. And I just feel like you could have had this character that you just there's so many things that person has to deal with that are otherworldly. You don't need to add.
You don't have to add
that to it. Yeah, you know, they could have been a really and I saw that with Superman too. They made Superman flawed. They made and I say the best Superman in modern times, not standing Christopher Reeve, was Captain America. Captain America was that noble person who always did the right thing. Look at Winter Soldier. It's a pretty much perfect movie.
Yeah, it's absolutely phenomenal.
And you take somebody who will do the right thing no matter what, and you put them in an impossible situation, and you watch them and I just think that the Hollywood writers and especially the studios are afraid to deviate from the formula.
Sure.
But they got it right with Captain America.
They absolutely did. And he's always been one of my favorite characters, and that's the thing that I love about him. It's very similar. A book that we mention every episode. I think we're contractually obligated at this point to list this book because we loved it so much. But Wizard Knight by Gene Wolfe, Sir Abel of the High Heart, who's the main character, and it's a first person book, so it's written through his perspective. He is very similar to that Captain America, Clark Kent superhero, Superman character of. Sir Abel doesn't always succeed, but he is always going to try to do what he thinks is right. Every single time. And he's going to try his absolute hardest to be the most noble and best version of himself and to live up to that, for him, that like knightly standard. And this, I love darker characters. I love darker worlds and darker stories. And partly because of that, I think I find it very refreshing when you have these characters that, maybe they're in a very dark situation or not, but they are going to try to be a good guy.
I love that. I mean, that's my wheelhouse, is characters who just try to do the right thing. I like having. That's why the word hero was, they were super, but they were heroes. They were people for us to, or characters for us to look up to emulate. What would someone in this situation, and that's why I'm not a fan of things like The Boys and the deconstructing of superheroes, because it's we already have that. You're just saying we have horrible people in the world. Let's give them superpowers. And it's like, but where are the heroes? We need the heroes, and I feel like so much of media is let's see how bad we can make people, and it's so rare that we get the heroes that we can just know that someone's just going to always try their best. They're not always going to succeed, like you said, but they're always going to try to do the right thing, and I think. Just I was watching. Gosh, I think it was because I was doing some research on LeVar Burton, because I just posted a video because I drew him during the live, and he was talking. He was doing like I think a TED Talk or something, and he was saying how our imagination throughout history has determined our future. He was talking about how, just using Star Trek as an example. He's like, classic Star Trek. Kirk would go down to the planet. He would magically, because they didn't have pockets, but he would always seem to find, that the not the tricorder, the communicator, flip it open, and Scotty, get me out of here. And he says, and somewhere in there, some young child remembered that. They became an engineer, and decades later, we have flip phones that changed the world, and he was just kind of saying how it's what we put into our media, what we put into our imaginations, out into books, into media, and whatever, becomes our future.
Yeah.
Because it's like we're manifesting that. And
I'm still waiting on the robots that clean your house. That
or
awesome.
the flying cars, yeah. But I think if that's the case, we're screwed, because our media is so much darker than it used to be, and it's so much. You love the post-apocalyptic stuff.
Oh, for sure.
Steven loves the post, and I can't stand it. I want to see the utopia. I want to see the Star Trek universes. I want to see the world where things are better. And it's funny because I get asked on the live. At least once alive, I get asked, if you can go anywhere in time, where would you go? And I always say the future. I don't want to go in the past. I want to go to the future. I want to see what the future is going to be like.
Yeah, no, that is a common thing of like, no, actually, the best time to be alive is right now.
Yeah.
If you go back to any other time in human history, it's like, no, I mean, it's still
better
it's
to be
still
alive
true.
now than
It still is true than any other time in human history. But that's a really fascinating point of not just art reflecting culture, but art almost influencing and predicting.
It's. I mean, again, it was LeVar Burton who said it, but it was really powerful to think that the stories that we dream up today could influence the future, and it's
like a manifesting thing almost.
It is.
Oh,
And I think we take that power lightly. I think we as creatives should be manifesting heroes and a brighter world. I mean, it's not like there's a lack of Mad Max with Fallout. I mean, there's so much of that already out there. The world could use a little bit of positivity.
Yeah,
I will say, I think one thing I do like. I mean, some stuff that I like is just dark. But even in the midst of some of the darkest stuff that I like, I think one of the things that maybe draws me to some of it is the humanity that comes in those darkest of times, and somebody even in the midst of that moment still trying to make the right decision.
Well,
and
that's
trying to do the right thing.
That's and I've not read it. I've only seen the movie. I know you both have read The Road. That's what's great about The Road, is that it's the father taking care of his son in the midst of just absolute.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the greatest love stories I've ever read. Yeah. It's also one of the most hopeless things I've ever read.
But there is that like shining. The father in that is a hero.
Yeah, for sure.
He's a hero that like, I'm going to take care of my son, even if the entire world just is completely decaying and dying.
And you can't watch Vigo and not think he's Aragorn in anything. He does great.
True.
He's amazing, but he's my king. You know what I mean?
Although Aragorn,
I would follow you.
Aragorn and Vigo is an interesting example, though. And the Lord of the Rings films are wonderful, but they also felt the need to give Aragorn this sort of like, I'm not sure if I'm ready to be king thing. Instead of in the book, he's just like, nope, I'm the king. I am the king. I haven't taken my throne yet. He's like totally unabashed. I will it one day, like take my destiny. And it's interesting. It's done well in the films so that it doesn't bother me really, but it is interesting. Again,
So he was more like a Thorin.
Yeah.
Well, I believe too in the books, one of the reasons why he's just like, no, I am a king. Yeah. Damn it, is because Elrond says, you can't marry Arwen until you're king of Gondor.
Yeah.
And so at that point, he's like, well, this whole ring thing we got to wrap this up, and I got to sit on that throne because that's the way that I get my woman.
Side quest. The Eowyn side quest is just such a hesitancy.
The movie also depicts Aragorn as having some like doubt about his ability, which is present in the book when they're on the journey going down the river and stuff. Once Gandalf is no longer with them, that is present in the book.
For sure.
He's like, I'm not sure if I'm doing. I don't know what Gandalf's plans were. I'm not sure if I'm doing the right thing. The movie grabs that feeling and adds that to Aragorn's entire character regarding his kingship, where like, again, I think there's something to what you're saying, Stephen, with Arwen, but like Aragorn in that, he's like, no, I would totally be an awesome king. Like, not that like I'm ready to do this and like not even in some like cocky way. He's just like, yeah, no, I'm like,
yeah,
I've been
in humility
born for this. Yeah,
I am the greatest.
Yeah.
I like both versions.
Sure. No, I'm not really criticizing one, but it is interesting though. There is this need. I feel like, which isn't always a bad way, but there's also like character development. Like we are really fixated on that in storytelling. Where like. Yeah, where a lot of older storytelling is like, nope, here's a dude and he's like a really good guy and he's going to have things he has to deal with, but like his character's not ever really in question. Or maybe we're going to try to put it in question, but usually he overcomes in the Superman or the John Carter or Tarzan's another.
Tarzan's like that too.
I'm really interested to hear what you think, Scott, about Conan, because I don't know if I could say Conan's a good guy.
No.
He kind of does the right thing, but he's also like, can anybody beat him? Like,
no,
ever?
Yeah.
But he is a hero, but he's also just like a pirate and a thief, and he'll like literally murder anybody.
Yeah.
Like,
if you're not a woman, he doesn't kill women.
So you're lucky there. Like, what do you think about Conan and the hero, like sort of like almost archetype that we're talking about here?
Conan was when I was early in my teens. So there was, you could say that animal magnetism that Conan had, you know, and there was that he got all the pretty girls, he beat up all the bullies. He was not like Spider-Man.
Yeah.
You know, Spider-Man was he was always the loser, you know, in life, and he had a hard time even as a superhero too. But Conan just made everything look easy, and he was confident, and he was, you know, he would walk in a room, and men and women would stop and gasp at him, you know. So there was, I think, for my 13-year-old brain, that was the coolest thing, and it didn't matter if he wasn't perfect as a hero archetype. He was, I think, what I as a 13-year-old went, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
You know?
I think you're tapping into something that's like the appeal of Conan though, and there is something like he is like a teenage hero because he is himself.
Yeah.
And when you're a teen, you're so much of it is like figuring out who you are and just being comfortable being yourself in the world. And that is what Conan is.
Yeah.
Comfortable with himself in the world and then going to do whatever he wants to do. And typically speaking, be successful doing it.
Yeah.
There really is something like deep down that like especially like your very teenage self is like, yes, like I need that.
Yeah. One thing I recall is you very rarely would ever see another Sumerian.
No, I don't.
Yeah,
I can't think of one.
In the books, there's not another one.
Yeah, and I don't recall ever seeing one in the comics. And so everywhere he went, he was kind of both in stature and in race. He was kind of a unicorn. And he would walk in a room. They would, oh my God, his darker skin, the build and everything, and I think he kind of carried himself in that way that, like you said, he was himself.
Yeah.
In every issue, he was among different tribes, among different people, among different cultures, and he was always himself throughout all of that. He didn't adapt himself really to that. He was always the one who just kind of stood out and
completely unapologetically.
Yeah.
I like that take a lot. Did you read the Conan Elric crossover.
Yeah, because I want to hear about your thought on sorcery too, and how Conan's like, ugh, get that away from me.
I got a couple of the Elric comics.
Okay.
But I didn't like them, and I immediately forgot about them.
Fair enough.
We have a pretty strong love annoyance.
I mean, it's
Elric,
tough when you have a great idea and really poor execution.
Yeah.
Like
I would call it an admire-despise relationship, to be honest.
There you go. We haven't fully delved into it on the podcast
sounds like planetary
yet,
romantasy.
But especially if you were reading it at that teenage age when Conan is so appealing. I mean, Elric was very specifically written as an anti-Conan, so it's like
okay.
And I can't speak to the quality of the comic books either. But some of the books are. We'll talk about this later. This is a whole an entire podcast.
Let's
worth
not
of
get
discussion.
started right now.
What about some other superheroes? I'm interested. I know you love Wolverine. And if memory serves, you have some of the, or had some of the old kind of original Punisher issues as well.
Yeah.
So where, kind of similar to Sam's question about Conan, where does Wolverine and Frank Castle fit into your hero archetypes?
When I finished, when I was really getting into Conan, there was a friend of the family who had come by, and I think they were staying with us or something, and they had mentioned that they had, you gotta read X-Men. And I was like, I didn't have the money to go, and he goes, that's okay, I have every episode or every issue, and he brought in these boxes, and that's how I learned how to keep them, from getting bent and bagging and boarding and all of that. And he just left all of them, and I got to just read all of the X-Men, and seeing that drastic change when they went from, I think it was Chris Claremont came in. And there was it was like issue 100 or something, and that's when we got Storm and Wolverine and Nightcrawler and whatnot. Just seeing that drastic shift in tone from a very classic kind of underdog kind of thing to them being just this very diverse group of characters. I wasn't as drawn to Wolverine initially. It was Nightcrawler and Colossus were my two favorites, and I loved Colossus. I think the same way that I liked Conan. He was the big strong guy,
Yeah.
But he was a good person.
Yes.
Nightcrawler was a good person too, and so I think I rooted for them more. Wolverine was just the grumpy person, with the claws, and
still kind of good, but just kind of grumpy. Just woke up on the wrong side of the bed constantly.
He's got to be a good guy, but
I think I got into Wolverine when they started doing the initial Wolverine episodes. I keep saying episodes. The Wolverine issues where he was like going to Japan. He was fighting the Frank Miller ones and stuff, and so I think that's when I really started to kind of get into Wolverine. But the Punisher, I got into, and again, these are now my 16, 17-year-old me, and I'm going to the comic shop. I'm getting into comics, and I really started to like that. Because they were the vigilantes, and now we're getting into more like the Batman, the Daredevil, that kind of stuff. That was when Frank Miller did, his Daredevil run, and then Elektra, and
was Dark Knight Returns after that, or
it was
or year one, and
he did Daredevil, and then he did Dark Knight. And then he came back for an Elektra. Elektra Lives, because he killed off Elektra in the series. And but all of that Dark Knight stuff and everything, I really started to like that because of the vigilantism. And then The Watchmen came out, and I was just like, then it started to just kind of fall apart because it was when Watchmen came out, it was let's deconstruct superheroes, let's make them human and not something that is super. Let's take away the hero aspect of them, and from then on, everything followed suit, and I think we lost our heroes when Watchmen came out, and I think at that point is when I collected some of the Image comics when they come out, but from Wildcats to Savage Dragon to whatever, everything just started to get a little more and a little more darker, a little more bloody, or a little more, the characters became more gray. And so I think I just lost interest in that. And then I started to want to write my own stories. And I think definitely when I had my boys is when I realized, when I did Spider-Man, so I guess I backtrack a little bit. So
no, good.
I had been wanting to do Spider-Man since I was a kid. Every year since I was.
When you say do Spider-Man, you mean like
be the artist on the comic?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and so I would.
Were you the artist on the comic?
I was, but
Whoa.
It took me 16, 17 years to do it. So
That's awesome.
From when I was 15 to when I was like 31 or 32, I would go to Comic-Con in San Diego with a portfolio.
Still have not gone there. It sounds amazing.
It was then. Now it's crazy. But I would go down there and I would get rejected. I would wait in line and they would say, "Better luck next time, kid." And
like you would show them your art?
I would show my art.
And
yeah,
it
was portfolio review.
It
was. I was there the
I
same.
think they were nice about it.
Yeah.
This is not good enough.
It was. There were good editors who would give you notes. Learn your anatomy, get better at your perspective, that kind of stuff. And then there was others who would just go, "Oh, thanks, next, kind of thing." And I would go to Marvel first, and then when I would get rejected, I would show it to DC and so on and so forth, and just get rejected by every comic book company. And it was during that time I graduated college. And I was working in video games. And so I was doing 16-bit games for like the Sega Genesis and whatnot. And then I got into arcade games at Atari. And then we moved down to, I got an offer to come and work at Malibu Comics. And so I was like, I get to go work for a comic book company. Cool. And I got to do the covers for Star Trek. And at that time I was doing colored pencils and airbrush and whatnot.
Right.
And so I was doing that. And then I was getting work doing the colors for Mortal Kombat comics and
awesome.
Bruce Lee comics and whatnot. Then I got into doing animation for TV and film. So I was doing 3D animation. So I was learning that kind of animation. So I was doing Casper, I was doing Power Rangers and whatnot. And every year I would go down with a new portfolio. I tried full color, I tried pencil and ink, I tried every possible style that I could do and just could not get the job. And
Dang.
It was 2000. I had met Marv Wolfman and Len Wein. Marv created the Teen Titans and Blade and did Crisis on Infinite Earth. Len Wein created Wolverine and Swamp Thing, and they were really good friends. And I told them my plight. I said, I've been trying for say 15 years, and I said, I have a novel. They had written a novel called Mayhem in Manhattan. It was, Spider-Man like prose novel that I had had since the 70s. And they were in LA and I was in LA. So when I said, after the con, can I meet you somewhere and get it signed? They said, sure. So I told them, I met with them. I told them, they signed it. And I said, how do I get into it? And they said, well, try this. And so we tried like taking a few pages of Mayhem in Manhattan and turning it into a graphic novel.
Okay.
And I went to New York. I was like, I'm going to take these. I was so proud of these pages. I'm going to take them. Went to New York, met with the editor, and they said, look, these are great, but we can't work with Marv Wolfman. He's currently suing us for Blade because
nice.
Marv had the rights to Blade, and Marvel just said, we don't care, we're just going to make the movie anyhow.
Oh shoot!
And poor Marv was in a lawsuit, and anyways,
there you go. Yeah.
So I came back dejected, and so Marv said, why don't you try this? Take your day job of animation and apply it to the comics and do it 3D. And so I did. I made a 3D Spider-Man, 3D Dr. Octopus, and I made a couple pages. And Marv handed it to them because even though he was suing them, he still had given like Axel Alonso his job there. Mm-hmm. And so he had some sway, and he handed it to him. And I didn't hear back. And then months after Comic-Con, I got a call, and it said, this was the days where Caller ID had just come out, and it said Marvel Comics.
Oh my
and
God.
I was like freaking out. And he goes, Scott, this is Axel Alonso. And I was like, hi. And he goes, saw your thing. He goes, I'm sorry it took me so long. He goes, but I love it. He goes,
wow.
Let's do this. I want you to come and work on more. And I said, I've been waiting 15 years for
no
this.
Kidding.
That's so cool.
And so I got the chance to do that. And it was funny because I tried again to get Marv to be, let me do Mayhem in Manhattan, and they said no, we're gonna put you with a writer named Greg Rucka, who had been doing Detective Comics, and the art I was doing was this bright like Saturday morning cartoon kind of stuff, and the story that Greg wrote, I kid you not, has the lizards, Dr. Kurt Connor's family gets cancer and dies. And the lizard goes crazy and goes after and he calls the company Monsanto. Like it was gosh. And it was just like this. And I'm so like half of the pages are in a stupid hospital room with the wife and the IV. And
amazing.
It's just,
nice.
And I was like, this is just, but I got to do it. I got to fulfill my childhood dreams.
Yeah.
I have every issue.
You have every issue
at home. I do.
And I just it was after that we had our boys. We had twins.
Yeah.
And I was like, I want my boys to read Spider-Man. And
Yeah,
every
no kidding.
Spider-Man current issue was just like that. And every X-Men was like that. Everything was like that. It was all deconstructing the heroes. It was all dark. And so what I did was I went, and back in the 70s they had these giant size comics. Yeah. And I just started finding, I didn't care if they were torn or whatever, just finding those, and we kept them in the minivan so the boys could just read Spider-Man and Hulk
like
and
the
Superman
original ones,
and all the be back when the storytelling, when they were really heroes, and that's what they grew up on.
Amazing.
That's awesome.
I did not realize, and it makes sense once you said it, that people went to Comic-Con to get work.
Yeah.
I literally thought it was, I guess this is all I was aware of. It was like nerds, non-derogatory, going down in costumes to just like goof off. I did not realize it was actually a work thing.
This was before costumes were really, cosplay, cosplay didn't really become a really big thing until the 2000s.
That makes sense. I guess I didn't realize it was such an old event.
This was the late 80s, all through the 90s.
Dang.
Do you think, is there even a place for that anymore at Comic-Con, an ability to go to Marvel and show work, or is it just now that Marvel is too big because of the MCU and there's no way to like sit down and show somebody some work?
I haven't been to Comic-Con in 17 years since we moved out here. I don't know if they still do portfolio reviews. I can't imagine they would, because I would think that you could do it online.
Sure,
Yeah,
and I was going to say it seems like
you used to need a meeting place.
But it also just, I've not been either, but it seems so big and so many people. I don't even know, even if you wanted to, I don't even know how you could possibly make that.
Aside from
tenable.
that, I gotta ask, like, why didn't you give up? 15 years. That's, and then you got it, and that's awesome. But I think that there's like, I'm making assumptions here, but there's got to be something in there, some tenacity. It's like, you know what, I'm gonna keep trying. Like, because 15 years you don't just do.
It's because he grew up with all his heroes who wouldn't quit.
Is that why though?
Yeah.
Like, because that's cool.
It is. I mean, it's. I think it was a little simpler. It was because you have to have something to hope for.
There
It was just, and it's funny because I posted a short where I talked about all of the video games I worked on.
I wanted to ask about that too.
Yeah, and people are like, oh my God, you worked on StarCraft. Oh my God, you worked on The Game of Life. You worked on Kid Chameleon. You worked on it. And it was like, I did Aliens versus Predator. I did all of these different things. And then all of the movie stuff that I did, Power Rangers and Casper and whatnot. And through all of that, I was like, oh, this is just a day job. I'm working at night. I'm going to get my job, because I paid it. I didn't enjoy it. It wasn't what I wanted to do. It was a cool job.
Yeah.
But it wasn't it was just like, oh, this is just how I make a living.
Yeah.
And it was like a really cool job. But it wasn't Spider-Man cool. And so I think just it was every night I would come home and I would work on my portfolio and to get ready for the next year.
Wow.
And but yeah, it was just it was the thing to hope for.
There you go.
And I needed that. And I think people do need that.
Oh yeah.
Those lofty goals to hope for.
So I grew up with a Sega Genesis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is there a favorite game you worked on that console?
The only one I did, because I worked at Sega.
Okay.
And it was a game called Kid Chameleon.
Oh, okay.
And where he gets the different helmets and he puts on the helmets and he becomes a samurai, or he becomes
Nice.
And
So
so
is it a Mario adjacent game? Is that
it was side scroller. Yeah.
Okay,
And but I learned, this was 1990.
Yeah.
They put you in front of this big monitor, and you had like a pen tablet, and you had like 8 colors to select from, and you had 16 pixels. It was like animating with Legos.
Yeah.
And that
so
was
cool.
it. And somehow you had to make this thing look like a samurai. And so it was just it was really a good brain puzzle.
Sure.
For a like a 19, 20-year-old kid to just go and go, okay. And you're looking at people who had been doing it for like a year or so, and you're learning from that. And
that's pretty young to be doing something like that.
I was a junior in college, so I was probably, like I was 1990, I was 21 going on 22.
Yeah. Nice.
Did working on video games like that feel cutting edge, or did it just feel like this is what I'm doing?
There was a couple times I felt cutting edge, and that was when we started to move over to 3D.
Sure.
And I had to learn, but this was a time when the pinnacle of 3D was the movie The Abyss, and that water. And
I remember that.
Yeah. And so
That's
we
so
had
funny.
to spend the game company had to spend $20,000 for this refrigerator. That was the processor. It was called an SGI machine. And then another $20,000 on the software. It was Wavefront or Softimage, depending on and then we had to go to training classes and learn this and then get certified. And it was just so like the whole world was open and we were learning. So we were getting paid to learn 3D. And so we learned to model, we learned to rig, we learned to animate, we learned to render and texture.
Fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it
So
was.
cool.
And then when we did the Casper movies, it was after the ILM one. So we did the sequels.
Yeah.
Like Steve Guttenberg and Rodney Dangerfield were in it and whatnot, which was really cool. But we were working on, this was now, say, 1997 or 8, and we were working on regular PCs now.
Yeah.
And we were working in like off the shelf software, and but I'd found the job on a wanted ad in the paper.
Wow.
And I went in and I said, I've never done animation for TV and film, just video game animation.
Yeah.
I've never done this kind of 3D animation, or I've never used the software. And they said, well, sit here next to these other people and let's see what you could do. And by the end of the day, because I just would, okay, how do I set a keyframe? How do I move an arm? How do I do this?
Right.
Because they just gave me Casper because I didn't have to model anything. I just had to animate it. So yeah, I got they told me to come back the next day, and I got the job. And because there were no animators who knew 3D at the time, it was still really, really new. It was me, maybe one or two other artists, and the rest of them were all engineers doing animation.
That's amazing.
Which was crazy. So within 2 weeks, I was the lead animator for Stretch, one of Casper's uncles. I never even touched the software before. It was my first time doing a movie or anything, and I was the lead, and it was a wonderful experience. But we did that, and then
So I want to jump back a little bit to comic books. Here on the table, we've got a bunch of stuff from Dreamland Chronicles, and I wanted to talk to you about Dreamland Chronicles. Have you tell us a little bit about that? Because I know it's one of your favorite things that you've done, but it also kind of ties in with a lot with obviously with the fantasy thing that we're talking about, but also I know with the writing things for your boys to read.
Yeah. So I when I was in college, I took an art history of illustration class, and one of the classes they were showing an old. This is turn of the century, when I say turn of the century, I now have to say 1901, 19, there was a comic strip every Sunday. It was called Little Nemo in Slumberland.
Oh, and, yeah.
I watched that whole movie.
So the movie was based off of that.
Yeah.
But it was essentially every night he would go to sleep, and then he would go to Slumberland, and he would have an adventure with the Princess of Slumberland, and her dad was King Morpheus, and every at the bottom panel he would wake up, and if he was drowning, it was because his mom was throwing water on him to wake up, or if he was falling, he would fall out of bed. It was always that kind of thing, and it was so popular. It had its own plays and everything like that. It was just a huge thing. And I remember being 18 or 19 years old and going, I wonder what happened to Nemo when he grew up. Did he go back to Slumberland? Did he still keep going? And that just stuck with me. Yeah. And when I finished, I had written a bunch of stories, like starting a story in college of Nemo. And then when I finished Spider-Man, I kind of was like, okay, well, I now have this new skill of being able to do a comic book with 3D. Mm-hmm. Let me see if I could tell my own story. And I wanted to do that. And so originally it was Alexander, who's the main kid, was Nemo. And so I originally wrote it as Nemo. And what I did was I threw in every bit of the things that I loved about fantasy into it. So like Paddington was a combination of Ben Grimm, The Thing, and the Rock Biter from the Never-Ending Story.
Yeah.
And I had Cat Girl, I had the elf, I have fairies, but I have the dwarves like from The Hobbit. I've got centaurs, which I've always loved. I've got dragons. I've got King Arthur in there. I've got Merlin. I've got mermaids. I've got I've got Egyptians. I've got Gilgamesh. I've got like just
awesome.
Anything that and it was just all of that kitchen sink stuff. And I wanted to do this. And while I was writing this, we found out that we weren't having a kid. We found out we were having twins.
Nice.
And so then suddenly I said, okay, well, I'm going to have Alexander have a twin brother and Daniel. And I named Alexander and Daniel on the middle names that I had for our boys. So my son is Logan Alexander and Brendan Daniel. And so they have that. And it was funny because they hadn't come out yet. They were still cooking. And I had already designed Alexander was going to have blonde hair and Daniel was going to have curly dark hair. And one of the kids came out blonde hair, and one of the kids came out curly dark hair.
Talk about
it was
manifesting.
the weirdest thing.
Talk about manifesting heroes.
But what I did was I decided, I did a comic book, and then I did a second issue, and it was around 2006. My boys are now going to be, I think they were 3, and a friend of mine, Audrey, said, you should put this online, and you should do it as a web comic, and so I did what I always do, which is I went and I researched web comics. I said, okay, set up a website, and started posting, because I had already done about 90 pages. Started posting a page a day, and responding, getting family and whatnot to go to the website and whatnot, and I did a page a day for 13 years.
Wow.
And I did 2,400 pages.
Wow.
And I finished 8 books, and we've had 34 million people come to the website.
Wow.
In that
cool.
13 years. It's been translated into different languages. We got the toys and everything. And while my boys were growing up, they would read. I would say, okay, I finished the next issue, and they would read it, and if they were getting into pirates at the time, I would add pirates to the story. If they were getting into
That's awesome.
Native Americans, I would add that. If they were getting to Egyptians, I would get, and so whatever they were into, I would add that into the story. And
Wow.
And it was such the 13 years I was working on it were really rough years. We were losing our house. We were on food stamps. It was really rough years. But I just said, I can't control what's going on, but every day I can at least make another page. And so I just put my head down, and I would at least know that I at least accomplished something.
Yeah.
And now, despite having worked on Spider-Man, despite having worked on all those video games and movies, making my own movie, I did Animal Crackers. I got to write and direct and meet all the Dreamland Chronicles is still the favorite thing that I've ever done. And I don't have good memories of making it because it was hard times.
Yeah.
But
it's a deeply personal thing.
It is. It's that thing that when people say, if you can go anywhere, in fantasy, I go Dreamland. Wow. Because
awesome.
That's the world I built for my kids. And
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Awesome. I wonder what percentage of great fantasy stories were written was like a parent writing it. Literally,
Winnie the Pooh was.
Yeah, Winnie the
right?
Pooh was, and Lord of the Rings was.
Well, The Hobbit especially. The Hobbit famously was him writing it down because his sons kept pointing out the discrepancies when he would tell it to them the next night.
Wait a minute. You said
that. Famously, I think he said something like Christopher pointed out something that he said that was different from the night before, and said, "Damn the boy," and went over and had to write down what the correct thing was.
So funny.
But I love that, and
I love it.
I love. I've got some ideas in my head for things that I want to write for my girls as they get older. So I love that story.
Some fun post-apocalyptic kind of.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
My first post-apocalypse.
Amazing.
What's funny is I don't think that my oldest will be into that at all. I could see my youngest following in Daddy's footsteps with some of that stuff.
It's funny.
Well, Scott, this has been absolutely amazing. We were so excited to have you here, and hopefully we can have you back. And we didn't even really touch on Animal Crackers, so maybe at some point in the future, we can have another discussion about that. Yeah, they're gonna love it.
I can't wait to show
You being our first guest, we're kind of wanting to start something where we end every interview with the same question, and that is that what would you like to see more of in science fiction and fantasy today?
Hope. I just want to see, like we were saying, like if we can truly manifest the future, I'd like to see more hope.
That's good. I love it.
That's an amazing point to end it on. Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you?
Everywhere. I even have a Snapchat. I never do.
You have a Snapchat?
My son, one of the boys went off to college and he had a Snapchat, and I was like, "What is this thing?" Next thing I know, I have 100,000 followers on his life. I don't even use it. You
gotta start sending some snaps, Scott.
Yeah, but yeah, mostly YouTube is my favorite place. YouTube, TikTok, it's all under Sava, because Scott Sava, Sava Art.
Well, we'll post links to all of that in all of the show notes. But this has been, yes.
Before that, I did have one question I want to ask.
Yes, please.
And I might interject this for every interview. But what do you order when you go to Taco Bell?
I haven't gone to Taco Bell in 20-something.
That's the answer I was looking for. Although, I mean, do you remember the menu from 20 years ago?
No.
90s Taco Bell was pretty elite.
That was pretty, that's kind of like the standard.
The crunchy cinnamon things. Do they? Yeah. I don't know if they still have those.
Yeah,
they still do.
Don't. Yeah. All right, well, there you go.
All right, this has been another episode of Under Towers, our first episode with a guest. Thank you so much, Scott. I'm Steven.
I'm Daniel.
Sam.
And, Amari, everybody. We'll catch you next time.